Good afternoon, this is Bob and welcome to the Higher Way podcast. Today we've got part two with Simon Gray and we're going to continue the journey where we left off, where he's now in Japan, he's in Tokyo, and he's about to embark on arguably the toughest martial arts course in the world, the Senshusei. Simon, how are you doing, mate?
I'm all right, thanks. Yeah, good to be back. Week flies by, doesn't it?
Oh, unbelievable, mate. Unbelievable. That's the nature of stuff. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've got work has suddenly picked up. It's incredible.
Yeah. Starting to get busier. Hopefully getting back to normal now.
Well,
well, maybe not.
Who knows, mate? Who knows? I'm not even going to say anything. I'm going to keep my mouth shut about that.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, on the last podcast, we sort of completed part of the journey that you talk about in detail in your book. And we looked at your history with the Muay Thai and winning the Northwest title and so on. And then you started training in Aikido.
Yes. And
then getting involved in taking that huge step of actually physically just giving everything up in the UK and moving over to Japan.
Correct,
Massive culture shock.
Yeah.
And we left you standing in the dojo, metaphorically, and you said there was just this sense of like total fear. What did you mean by that? What do you mean?
Yeah, so if you can imagine, I'd read about the Senshusei course. I'd watched some videos about it. There's quite a lot of stuff online about it. So I had this image of what it might be like, and I remember arriving at the dojo. They had a lift. I went in the lift for the only time I ever went in the lift. Every other time you've got to go up the stairs, and you come to the top of the stairs, and you see the statue of Kancho Gozo Shioda, who is the founder of Yoshinkan Aikido, and you turn right, and suddenly you're in the dojo. And I'd never been there before. I'd seen it on film, but there was a real sense of, I guess, tension is probably the best word to describe it.
Right.
And there's people in white pajamas running back and forth. There's lots of us, people shouting that all over the place. And it just had this sense of kind of disbelief and awe that I was actually there at a place that I'd researched and I'd read lots about. And I really didn't know what to expect. And I guess it was a kind of similar feeling that I'd had in Thailand when I went to Thailand first off and walked into Caribou Gym or walked into Sasiprapa or one of the other camps that I trained at. But I think the difference here was I knew that I was going to be here for some time, and it was a really big commitment that I was going into.
And that was 11 months, wasn't it? That 203 days.
Yeah, exactly. You counted them. So, I mean, when I got to Japan, in all honesty, I went to Japan with the mindset that I was going to do the Senshusei course.
Right.
But I got to Japan in 2005. Can't remember exactly when it was. Kind of mid 2005, I think. And then the Senshusei course started the following April. So I had a bit of time to acclimatize. And this is where, as I explained last time, I started with the regular classes. Mm-hmm. And I was watching from the vantage point of the regular classes and looking at what the Senshusei or the specialist, the advanced class was doing. And that was the bit that I wanted to get into. Although I kind of did and I didn't, because I knew it was there. I kind of like had to do it.
And it is one of the so I mean, for those that don't know much about the course itself, the Senshusei course, can you describe it?
Yes, yeah. I mean, people badge it as the toughest martial arts course in the world. Now, I don't know whether it is. There's probably a whole host of other martial arts courses that are just as tough and just as arduous. The thing that makes the Senshusei, and it is tough, I've done it. The thing that makes it tough. And where it sits in the pecking order is not particularly relevant. But what makes it tough is that this thing lasts for 11 months. So for 11 months, you are assigned to the dojo, the training place. You kind of give your heart, soul, and energy to Yoshinkan Aikido, and you are required to be there 5 days a week. You get to the dojo at around about 7 a.m. You're doing cleaning. You do a first class. You're doing some ceremonial bowing and scraping we had to do. You do a second class, you do more bowing and scraping and cleaning and what. You do a third class. So basically you're training for 4 hours a day.
Right. And
you're doing that 5 days a week for pretty much 11 months. There's a couple of little breaks for holidays. The one thing the Japanese do very, very well is have national holidays. So when we have bank holidays, they take a whole week. So that was quite refreshing part way through the course. So what makes it hard is not, and I've tried to explain this to people in the past, it's not any particular class, because you can get through a hard class. You can get through one hard class, and in the regular world, you get through one hard class and you can go home and you can take 2 or 3 days off and relax.
Yeah.
What made this hard is the relentless nature of the course, that you had to train whatever, whether you were tired, unless you were really sick, you had to train. And if you were sick, you had to do what's called Matori Geiko, which means watching training. So that basically meant sitting on your knees in the seiza kneeling position for up to 4 hours a day, which I did 4 hours, I think, in one particular day. So it's mentally very draining. The training is quite monotonous because it's all about the basics of Yoshinkan Aikido. So, if you can imagine, you teach your Muay Thai class, Bob. If you can imagine that you got your students in one night and you said, right, what I want you to do is to stand in left fighting stance for 30 minutes. And then halfway, we're going to change to right fighting stance. And that's that class done.
Yeah.
That's mentally it's physically very, very draining.
That's worse than hard training.
Yeah. So mentally and physically, it was very, very tough. And just waking up in the morning and thinking there's another day of this to go is a very hard thing to do. And then as you'll have read in the book, I had to work in Japan for the visa and to make a living to feed myself and whatnot. So I was getting to the dojo very early on in the morning. I was doing the dojo stuff. I then usually have an hour where I traveled across Tokyo. I get to Berlitz, the language school I was teaching at. I teach till about 10 p.m., get one of the last trains home, and then I'd be up again the next morning at 5:20 a.m. And in the winter and summer months, they do what's called Shochu Geiko and Kan Geiko, which is early morning summer training and early morning winter training. Both are as bad as each other, because what I have learned from living in Japan is a country of extremes in more than just weather. Well, that's another story. So you'd be training in the freezing cold or the boiling hot. So dehydration during the summer was a constant enemy. And quite a few people succumbed to that. So all in all, it's not any one particular class. It's the relentless nature of this thing that once you sign up to it, unless you drop out and quit, which I never thought of doing, if I sign up for something, I'm going to do it. You're assigned to that, and you give your heart, soul, and everything else pretty much to the dojo. So
not once did you feel I can't carry on?
I felt a few times I couldn't carry on,
right?
But I reminded myself.
What drove you? So this is the thing. What motivated you? Because lesser, I'm not blowing smoke up your ass, but lesser people would have gone, I don't actually need to do this. I'm doing this to myself. That's it. And you see this in Thai boxing all the time. People will train, and then they just suddenly just stop coming. They stop training because they've got that opportunity to get out. But why? What drove you to stay the course?
To stay. Yeah, it's a good question. I think talking a bit generally before I get into the specifics of that, we all kind of read stuff, don't we? We all have ideas of stuff that we might like to do.
Yeah.
And then suddenly when we're doing it, we think, I'm not sure this is what I signed up for. So to put a Thai boxing spin on it, I remember when I decided I was going to fight. I remember my first fight, and anyone who's fought in the ring will probably be nodding right now. The bell goes, you're facing your opponent, and 10 seconds in, you think, I'm exhausted. What the hell am I doing here? How do I get out of this situation? And then you pull yourself together and realize this is what you signed up for. And actually, you're not going to quit. You're going to push on. It was the same with the course. I'd read about the course in the book Angry White Pajamas, and I'd made a commitment that I wanted to do it. Suddenly you're in it and you realize that what you've read about when you're experiencing it for yourself is far worse than you could ever have probably imagined.
Yeah.
I think a number of people have read my book now.
Yeah.
Suck It Up or Go Home, my account of that year. And a number of the top international Yoshinkan Aikido instructors have read the book. And I've had various bits of feedback, and people have said to me, God, you had a really, really hard year. Possibly hard in terms of how we were taught, what we were taught, and some of the stuff that we had to do, which has surprised quite a lot of people who've read what we did and got up to in that year. And kind of being immersed in that, there were surprises every day, and mentally you never quite knew when the pain would come to, you knew pain would come to an end in any particular class, but you weren't quite sure when. Although we had what I think was quite a difficult year, the one thing we had in our year, we had a good group of people.
Right.
So people from all different backgrounds, all different places on the planet. But
yeah, sorry to interrupt, but that's what struck me when I started reading all of these. I don't know why, but I expected it because it was in Japan, because it was over an 11-month period. I sort of genuinely expected you and maybe one other Gaijin, one other foreigner, and the rest would all be Japanese. No. But actually, it was a real cross section of the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is the Senshusei course is the Riot Police course. So its origins are that the Yoshinkan Aikido would teach the Riot Police, and to get into the Riot Police, you would have to do one of the Budo arts, Judo, Kendo, Karate, or Aikido. And then because of the international interest and some of the teaching that went on, people wanted to travel from overseas, and Yoshinkan Aikido thought this would be a good idea to bring people like me over to give us an experience and give us an instructor's license once we've gone through their training to kind of export the art. But on my course, there was 13. 2 of those were Japanese, so civilian Japanese, not police. And we trained alongside the police as well in one of the classes each day. But there were people there from the US, a big Israeli contingent, UK, couple from the UK, Australia, probably forgetting, Canada as well. I was going to say Canada. So there's a real cross-section of people, cross-section of ages. I was one of the oldest. But when you're thrown into an environment like that, you either sink or swim. And although we were very different, and we'd have our bad days and we'd argue and bicker and take the mickey out of each other constantly, there was a sense of a shared journey.
Well, it's like your typical family, isn't it, by the sound?
Yeah. Your typical dysfunctional family, because it was quite dysfunctional at times. But through the torment and pain and relentless nature of the course, we did help each other to get through. I was lucky. I had, a number of people that I was much closer to on the course that I never would have met had I done the course, and we all pulled each other through. We all put each other through. And actually, I wrote the book 13 years having completed the course, and I reached out to my former comrades on the course, and the conversations I've had, it was like we just, we were talking yesterday. Because, whether you're in the military, whether you're in some kind of stressful situation and you have to pull together, I think that bonds you for life, even if you're very, very different people with very different backgrounds and very different outlooks on life.
Yeah, I'm getting the sense when I'm reading the book, because I'm not finished it yet, that this camaraderie is building up.
Yes.
It's exactly as it would in the military, in the police force, in any structured, organized sort of institution where you have people in high stress occupations.
Correct. Yeah. Correct.
But it did amaze me that there was only a couple of Japanese on the course, and they were both civilians.
Yes.
So when you trained with the police,
yes.
Okay, so when the Riot Police were actually taking part in the training, did the instructors up the training, or was it just the same all the way through? Was there a different feeling in the class?
Yeah, there wasn't I wouldn't say there was so much a different feeling. It was usually the second class of the day that we trained with the Riot Police, or the Kidotai, as we call it in Japanese. The first thing I should say on the Riot Police is, if I say to you, Tokyo Riot Police, you probably have an image in your head.
Right, yeah.
I'm not going to ask you what the image is, but my image was...
I'll tell you what it is.
Go on.
A lot of really small people
with
nasty attitudes. Because I've trained with lots of Japanese, and this is not a generalization, okay? The ones I've met have been quite nasty people with really big sticks and shields and visors and armor, screaming, like a samurai, like crazy samurai. Yeah. And that's the feeling I get from some of the Japanese karate instructors I trained with when I was a young lad, that these guys really believed they were samurai.
Yes.
Am I wrong?
Probably in my year, yes. Because I had 2 thoughts. Before we met the Riot Police, I asked myself the question, well, Japan's one of the safest countries in the world. Why do you need a Riot Police? Yeah. We have Riot Police in the UK, but we probably need it.
We do need them, yeah.
We do. So the first question was, why do they have a Riot Police? And then I had this expectation, much similar to yourself, would be samurai. Back in the day, there'd have been samurai. You wouldn't want to mess with these guys. They're all probably, they might not be super tall, but they're going to be pretty strong and pretty robust. but actually the majority of them were really quite meek and mild.
Right.
And I was shocked.
Yeah.
And kind of we as the Westerners, and quite a few of us, at least 50% of us, had done martial arts before. We were kind of the tougher outfit, if you like,
Right.
which was quite surprising. And we got on quite well with the cops, but we had this kind of, you know, we need to dish it out to the cops, and they probably had, we need to dish it out to the international Senshusei. And I think that was fostered and encouraged by the teachers.
Of course,
So we had a few bits of back and forth. What I found with the Japanese instructors, and one Japanese instructor in particular, who I do write about a lot in the book, Chino Sensei, he seemed to favor the international students.
Okay.
And he seemed to go harder on the Japanese Riot Police. And I debated in my own head why this might be. And I think he kind of, what resonated with him was that, you know, we had traveled halfway around the world, spent money, left secure jobs and this, that, and the other to pursue Aikido. Whereas these guys, they roll into the dojo, you know, they're being paid to be there. It's a kind of, it's a kind of different thing. So I think, you know, while arguably there still exists some racism in Japan, sometimes towards gaijin. You know, people from outside of Japan. I think on the mats, that particular instructor, he very much respected us because of what we'd given up to pursue a dream that he probably had one day, but albeit he was in Japan and could take advantage of that.
That would make a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah.
Which says to me that he's a very fair judge of character. He's a good man.
Yeah. You might not have said that in all the classes.
I mean, from a personal point of view, I mean, obviously when he took the classes, I'm assuming he didn't take all of the classes, being the head of the school. So he would organize the day-to-day discipline of the instructors who were training you, and obviously the group itself. So he would turn up, obviously, at certain times and observe the class.
Not really. No, the way it worked, the first class of the day, we'd always have an international instructor. So usually it was a British guy that taught us, guy from the Philippines. And some of the Japanese lower level instructors were classed as international instructors. It all got a bit complicated. But there was a hardcore of Japanese instructors. So Chino Sensei, who taught us probably the most, he wasn't the top guy. He wasn't the Dojo Cho head of school, or Kansho head of Yoshinkan. But he did teach us a lot. And you know, he was pretty brutal, to be honest. He could be pretty, he had a reputation for being fairly brutal, but you judge as you find. And I think some people who've read my book, you know, I talk about two different teaching styles in Yoshinkan Aikido. One style advocated by Chida Sensei, who was the Dojo Cho head of the school, and one kind of harder style, I would say, advocated by Chino Sensei, who was, you know, a slightly lower level. And probably the Chida Sensei's Aikido is more popular around the world, and as a character he would probably be more popular, but you judge as you find. And he didn't teach us that much, and Chino Sensei gave his time, energy, and experience, and really for the international Senshusei, he gave us a lot. So as I put in the book, you know, the Senshusei course, Yoshinkan Aikido Hombo Dojo, they sent out mini chinos into the world as opposed to mini cheetahs, when actually they're probably meant to send out mini cheetahs.
Mini cheetahs, who's much more personable and
just more internationally recognized and more probably well regarded.
So in terms of skill, who would you consider to be the best?
It's a really good question. There's this thing in Aikido that people talk about it's called the Shite and Uki relationship. So to use a Muay Thai parallel, there's not really a Muay Thai parallel.
No.
So somebody doing the kick would be the Shite, and somebody receiving the kick and blocking it would be the Uke. Now in Aikido, this Shite Uki relationship can, in my experience, get a bit confused. And what you find is, for some of the, certainly when you become an Uke for the Japanese masters, there is a tendency that you will or could go with the flow of the technique, even if you resisted the technique, would the technique come on? And then it's the counter argument to that is, well, you have to, otherwise you'd be seriously injured.
Yeah, you're going to get hurt. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, I judge as I judge as I find, and I remember in a couple of classes, not with Chida Sensei, but a couple of the other Japanese instructors, that they'd, you know, there's one class in particular where a technique was applied on me. It was a shoulder grab, and it was a throw, I think, from a shoulder grab. And the instructor moved to throw me, and I knew I was not going to get thrown. If I had just stood there, nothing would have happened. But with the kind of peer pressure of the people around me, the assistant instructors and whatnot, I threw myself and went with the throw. Now that happened with some of the Japanese sensei, but when you went up against Chino Sensei and you grabbed him, you were in fear for your life and your limbs. So there was no compliance. You know, it was you need to move, otherwise you're in trouble. So I guess as a martial artist, you know, starting my roots in Kung Fu, you have a hard style of Kung Fu, you have a soft style of Kung Fu. I've always veered more towards the hard, possibly more obvious style, which maybe is why I was attracted to Muay Thai. I'm sure there is merit in the softer style of Aikido, but for me, it wasn't the type of Aikido that I really wanted. I wanted the
more practical, hands-on.
Well, yeah, I guess so. And it's difficult, isn't it? Because if you think about Muay Thai, you test yourself. You know, if you want to test your skills and ability, you get in the ring and you have a fight.
Yeah.
It's very easy to test yourself.
Yeah.
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which I do now, if you want to test yourself, you get on the mats and you have a roll, and you tap if you get in trouble, or you make the other guy tap. In Aikido, there's no equivalent. So there's no sparring. There's no real ability to test that in a combat environment unless you are in a combat environment. So what that does allow, I think, is it allows people to take Aikido as a martial art for very different reasons than wanting to do a martial art, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. No, it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people want to be involved in martial arts, but don't want to get hurt, don't want to get into a fight, and don't like the aggression that you would get in a contact sport. And of course, the opportunity of getting injured as well, of course.
Exactly. So people do it some people do it for a very different reason. And I think what that does, it allows this kind of compliance to creep in. Yeah. Even though I think, and people have asked me about this, even though I think Aikido is a wonderful martial art and it's a very practical martial art, but its efficacy, if that's the right word, its efficacy is down to the person doing it and their interpretation of it. Yeah. You know, if you walk into a Muay Thai gym, you know, in my experience, 90% of the people are there. They can take a punch. They're going to get into the sparring, or they're probably going to leave at some point. Yeah. Whereas in Aikido, you could have over 50% of the school have never had a physical altercation at all. So it's different things. And the irony of all of this, when I started out in martial arts, pretty quickly I got into Muay Thai, which is arguably the roughest and toughest of you know, the striking arts, at least. Yeah. But what I got from Aikido in the end, and I won't preempt it because you may ask me about this, was nothing to do with fighting. No. That was what I was going to come on to. Actually, what I was going to talk about, and you there was a few references to it earlier on. A lot of ritual in Japanese society. Yes. I guess that ritual played quite a large part in the day-to-day training as well. Am I right? Even rituals, and by rituals, you probably know what I'm going to say. Cleaning the floor in a dojo is part of the ritual of the training. So, I mean, were there, as well as things like cleaning the floors, the latrines, the toilets, everybody is assigned a job. It's a discipline. It has to be done in a structured way. Were there any other rituals that were observed? We've heard you say right from the beginning, you were talking about us. For people who don't do Japanese martial arts, it's happening all the time in a karate club, an Aikido club. Everybody's us.
And when people go from Thai boxing to karate, go, what's all this ussing going on?
Yeah.
A friend of mine who did karate with me back in the day came to my gym years ago, and he walked in, he went, "Us, okay, Bob," and all the guys were like going, you know. So aside from the obvious that we've sort of made reference to, what other ritual elements were there to it?
Yeah. Okay. So there's probably two main rituals that I'll talk about now. So first of all, just to say about the cleaning. Now, we had to clean the dojo in the morning and before we left.
Yeah.
And we were sold on this idea of cleaning, that this was about attention to detail and discipline. Now, I wasn't quite convinced. I thought maybe it was about free cleaning for the dojo.
Free cleaning, yeah.
But with hindsight, it was about attention to detail, and it was about discipline, doing something you didn't necessarily want to do and doing it to the best of your ability. And I talk a bit about this in the latter part of the book, Aikido Shugyo, and this, that, and the other, detail and discipline. A couple of the other rituals, we did the first class in the morning from 8:30 till 9:30, and then we had to do something called Shinkoku. So Shinkoku is kind of like a request or a declaration that we would all line up outside Kansho, the head of Yoshinkan's office, and Kansho would come out, we'd bow, we'd say us, and then the Shinkoku Toban, the main Shinkoku person for that particular week, would step out and say various things in Japanese, which translated into English as, please can we have permission to train today, even though we'd already done a first class. And they would have to repeat that ritual at the end of the day, after the last class at 1:30, and then carry on and do the cleaning. So Shinkoku was a daily ritual. To be honest, it was quite nice. It was a bit like changing of the guard or something like that. It was quite nice, and it did fire us up all together as a unit for that second, often toughest class. The most difficult ritual, and the ritual that had its good parts but also its bad parts, was something called Zagaku. And Zagaku means to sit and learn. So on a Thursday, our last class of an hour and a half was cut short to 45 minutes, and we'd all file into the dojo, and we'd line up in kind of parallel like that, with the Japanese instructors more towards the shomen, the ceremonial shrine, the front of the dojo. And what would happen is we'd sit in this seiza position, so kneeling position, which I've recently learned was actually a method of Japanese torture many, many years ago. I get that. So we'd sit in seiza.
Whoever thought it would be easy to kneel down?
Yeah, we didn't have the concrete blocks across our legs, but it felt like it at sometimes. So if you've never done seiza, I'm not advocating you do it for anyone watching, but if you want a taste of it, if you sit in the kneeling position and don't move, keep your back straight for anything more than about 10 minutes, your legs fall to sleep and the pain becomes incredible. Yeah. So we would sit in this position, and Kansho would come in, the head of the Yoshinkan, and he would call out your name. So he would say, Simon, and I would have to bow. And then in Japanese, I would have to do two things. I would have to recount a hansei, which is a reflection to something I'd not done so well and I was trying to improve, and a shukan, which means a habit. So, I tidy the slippers in the toilets before I leave. And then a Japanese instructor would comment in Japanese, and I wouldn't necessarily understand what they said because I'd had to spend a long time preparing my Japanese. So we would go through this scenario every week. And on the plus side, having a reflection and talking about habit, that's self-awareness, it's mindfulness, it's a very, very good thing. But the ridiculous side of it was we were all in so much pain. Nobody could really focus on what was going on. Yeah. And that was a real hardship of the course, not just in the Zagaku class, which could last up to about 45 minutes, but throughout any training day, you would be in that kneeling position for quite a period of time. And for me, that was tradition and ritual gone, well, for ritual's sake. Yeah, if I tell you now, 13 years on, I'm at the doctor's tomorrow with my left knee. I've had physio for years. I cannot fix it. It's getting worse and worse and worse. Yeah. And some of that is getting kicked in Muay Thai, but the majority of that is the kneeling position in Japan. I
would completely agree with that because I did karate for years from the age of 10. And we used to finish every session. This was back in the old days when it was, I believe, done properly with the rituals. Yeah. And we do seiza and moxo, breathing meditation.
Yes, yeah.
And it was only 10 minutes. And people who've never, as you say, people who've never sat in Seiza on a wood floor with your feet folded behind you, it's incredible. It's stretching all of the ligaments in an unnatural way. And I remember, I'm just thinking, thank God this is only 10 minutes. But then I started doing Zen meditation at a temple in Hexham when I was 12, 13. And I remember meeting a group and they said, oh, we sit in Seiza doing Zazen for 40 minutes. And I was like, oh my God. And I really worried about it, but they give you a cushion. I was like, oh. And so you sit on a cushion so you've got a cushion on the floor like a mattress, and then the zabuton it's called, and then the zafu, the cushion, is on top of it, and you kneel on that. Oh, it's wonderful.
It would be after a wooden floor.
Why didn't it? You would have dreamed of a cushion under you, because in the Zen temples they do sit in Seiza doing zazen.
Yes.
You know, like Zagaku. I mean, you explain this in the book. Za means to sit, Gaku means to learn. Zazen means sitting meditation, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
So are you going to put a thing in to the Senshusei and say, as an international instructor, I'd like to add this little cushion thing, and we can sit and reflect so much better.
Well, some of us wore knee pads, you know, the cushion knee pads.
I would have been the first to grab a pair of those. Yeah.
and it was like a game of trial and error where you put the knee pads. You put them on your knees, on your shins, but it was a bit like you know, clinical trials for a new drug. you know there's going to be side effects.
Yeah.
And once you've done it, you're going to take the side effects for the next 45 minutes. The other ritual, and you mentioned it just a moment ago, Bob, was this us thing.
Yeah.
So for those watching who haven't trained in Japanese martial arts, you hear this word all the time, and what does it mean? It's really an acknowledgement of understanding, respect, and agreement that you will do something. I've heard various explanations for it. The better explanation I've heard is that it's a contraction of Ohayou gozaimasu, which means good morning, which is what you say the first time you meet somebody in a given day. Yeah. But that was a crazy thing as well, because I remember one class, one of the other senseis, Ito sensei, was teaching us a technique, and he said to us, do you understand? And we all went, us. And he said, no, tell me yes or no. Do you really understand? Because if you don't, I can teach it in a slightly different way. So what did we do? We all said us. And that's all we could, you know, we were so programmed to do that. So it was, as I said earlier, Japan is a country of extremes. That was another example of things being taken too far that kind of thwarts and stops progress and learning, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's become like a habitual pattern rather than a real expression of respect.
Yes.
I mean, you see it sometimes in Thai boxing clubs where somebody's been programmed to just bow.
Yeah.
And I remember being in Thailand one time, and one of my students was doing this to Pimu every time he spoke. And Pimu was going, no, morning, yeah, good, finish, bow, good, that's okay. But some of these Westerners, but they weren't even, they didn't even know they were doing it.
Yes,
They're just doing it. And the meaning's gone then, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I think, you know, coming back to, you know, my time in Thai boxing, when I travel up to Manchester to train with Crew Tony or with Master Leg, I would always observe respect and the wide bow and this, that, and the other. But, you know, if I wanted to ask a question about a technique to better my understanding, surely that's good for the art. It's good for the progression, and it's good for the, you know, you're going to become an instructor, the next generation of people that come and learn. Yeah. But in Japan, you know, you couldn't ask questions. No.
I know it was very much like that in traditional karate in the UK. You did not ask Sensei Inoida a question. Why did we do it like this? Because it was just, as you said, actually in the first podcast, you did as you were told, essentially.
Exactly.
You just do it. Don't question it. Do it. They know better than us. Follow what they're saying. Even though that could better the art.
Yeah. But that kind of do as you're told, I get that, because we were starting in the basics. But then partway through the course, after 9 months, you switch from, you get your shodan, your black belt, pass your black belt test. And then you switch to the instructor's phase of the course. And I remember there was a speech given to us by Murray Sensei, who was the head of the international contingent. And he said to us something along the lines of, okay, for the last 9 months, you've been a machine. You just do as you're told. but now actually we want you to think,
Oh,
because
okay.
you're going to go out there and be an instructor,
Yeah.
and you have to make that transition. And I think he understood that, because he's a Westerner. He'd come to Japan. He recognized that if you're going to teach Aikido in the West, people are going to ask you a question. Why do you do this? Why do you do that? And they're going to expect you to answer it. You're not going to have many students if you adopt a pure Japanese style.
Yeah.
So he was preparing us for that mindset change, if you like.
So the whole mindset thing as well. I mean, in terms of character building, which the Japanese are really big on, and I remember, again, harking back to my days when I was training with Japanese, the big thing was karate do kyohan. You know, this idea that it was about character building. There was a philosophy that underlay the whole process of teaching. So it was more than just an art for fighting.
Yes.
And you've already made allusions towards that when you talked about the two different styles of Aikido. You know, you had China Sensei and Chida Sensei, the two different approaches. How much do you feel the course you did improved your character, I guess I'm trying to say, and changed the way you do things in your daily life, or did it not?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Bob. Really, I'm glad you've asked that one. I'll be honest with you, and I reflect on this in the book. When I finished the course, because I'd been in that thing for 11 months and didn't have to think, I probably had some kind, not breakdown, but some kind, I was lost. That's probably the best way to describe it. And I didn't really know what I was doing or what I should do. I'd had all that focus on the one goal of getting to the end, and I wanted to get to the end. But when the end came, I wanted to go back to the beginning. And I liken it. I think I liken it into the book, the fact that you're in a fast car, you hit the accelerator, you want to get to the destination as fast as you can. But as you approach that destination, you realize, because you've been going so fast, you haven't looked out of the either side. You've not seen what's gone past you. And you want to slam on the brakes. And that's how I felt towards the end. Right. So from a psychological, mental point of view, when I finished the course, I was lost, probably for a couple of years. Really lost. Didn't know what I wanted to do for a career, relationship-wise, just nightmare. But then I started to reflect on the course, and I got myself sorted, got focused again, and went back to Muay Thai, and that always helps, and went back to jiu-jitsu and whatnot. But what I learned, I think, from Aikido and reflecting back on Aikido, is that Aikido is it's a principle for life. And what I mean by that is, it's very tempting in life, and we all do it, that you'll come into a situation with somebody and there is a disagreement, there is a confrontation. And if there's a confrontation, this happens. This person gets angrier, this person gets angrier, and it escalates out of control. I'm not talking necessarily about a physical confrontation.
No.
It could be a verbal confrontation.
Yeah.
It could be in your relationship with, your partner or whoever, with my wife, for example. And what I realized was that what Aikido teaches you is to absorb that energy and redirect it, to not let that energy impact you. Because Aikido is all about circles.
Yeah.
I was very lucky that on our trip to Iwama, which is where Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido, had his dojo, we happened upon a kind of temple. And we were invited in by a group of about 10 men, the keepers of the temple. And one of them happened to be a student of Morihei Ueshiba.
Oh, wow.
And we asked him, there's a video on my YouTube channel of this question.
Yeah.
We asked this gentleman, what is the secret of Aikido? What is it all about, according to the founder? And he said, it's all about circles. It's about redirecting negative energy. And if somebody attacks you, that's negative energy. So although I don't go to an Aikido dojo anymore, I believe that I practice Aikido in my heart every day, because if I get into a confrontation, a disagreement, the first thing I try and do is understand the other person's perspective.
Yeah.
And I try and redirect that energy through questioning, through understanding, to diffuse the situation so that we both walk away in one piece and not angry. Whereas, a lot of people, I think, go through their course of life and they don't really think about that. So they'll have an argument and they'll get their point across, and they might feel good for a second that they've got the point across, but they're going to walk away with a lot of negative energy and baggage.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the things, and it's sometimes one of the criticisms of Aikido, is that it is the gentle art. It's not actually the gentle art, because it doesn't have to be, but you can apply techniques, you can do the throwing stuff and whatnot without actually injuring your opponent, which is one of the reasons the police like to use it.
Yeah.
So I took that principle, and I have that principle with me every day. The other principle I took from Aikido, which is not purely about Aikido, is it's a Japanese proverb, and it's right at the start of the book. I carry it with me. It's on my wrist in Japanese, which is Nanakorobi ya Oki, which is fall down 7 times, stand up 8, which is a recognition, quite literally in Aikido worlds, particularly on the course, that you're going to get thrown, you've got to get back up, thrown, back up. And in life, we take knocks. It's part of the experience. Learn from that experience.
Yeah. So Aikido is a metaphor for living, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's a saying, which is, let me get this right, Aiki Soku Seikatsu, which means Aikido and life are one, effectively.
Yeah.
Aikido is life.
And you see, when you were talking there, I was thinking about, because I've been involved in Zen meditation all my life since I was about 12 years old. And I've always meditated, and I teach people to meditate, and in a specific Japanese way as well, because I think it's one of the cleanest, simplest, minimalist methods there is, with no frills. It just does what it says on the tin. And I've come up with this sort of fourfold thing, which is whatever happens, and I think you've sort of talked about it, and it's really quite nice. I know this is your podcast, but it was sort of it was clicking some buttons for me, triggering things off. You embrace what's going on in the moment. You embrace what's happening in the moment. You don't judge. You just embrace it. Take it for what it is. You said to see it from the other person's perspective as well. Yeah. Particularly if you're talking about an argument.
Yes, for sure.
And that way you start to notice the habitual reactions you start to have things. Instead of just suddenly snapping and going like this, and this was the action you did, you go, whoa, hang on a minute. Let's let go of the habitual reaction, stop that reaction from happening, and then move on. Which I guess is that theory of the circle, isn't it? It's about what's going on within that circle. Because if the circle starts spinning faster and faster and faster, it gets very turbulent in the middle,
Yes.
And it has no focus. But I guess what I'm trying to say is Aikido's, it's a principle. It's a principle of being able to add more focus to your life, which allows you to stand back a bit and take account of it, rather than just go boom, head on and into it. Because Aikido doesn't work like that, does it? The people I know who do Aikido, and I've got a friend who's a doorman, and he says, when people say Aikido doesn't work, he says, well, you do if you've got the right attitude. And he said it, and I smiled when you said there's 2 types of Aikido, because that's what he does. He teaches the nice Aikido to his students who never want to fight in their lives and never have to, and he teaches it to the police, but it's a very different Aikido. And I guess that's what was going on in Japan with Chida and China.
Yeah, I think so. And I think Aikido is about Aikido is, you can use Aikido to defend yourself. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's not a sport.
No.
So as such, it's not tested as a sport, as Muay Thai is. And Muay Thai is slightly different because it originates from the battlefield. So it's a warrior art.
Of course,
from Krav Maga and Muay Thai, as you know. But it's not a sport. You can use it, but it's down to the interpretation of the practitioner. And it can be very, very effective, but you don't have to test that confrontation if you enroll in an Aikido school. I think if you go to a Thai boxing school, and this is why I decided I wanted to fight, to really understand Muay Thai, I think you got to do some really hard sparring. You've got to step in the ring, once or twice. You don't have to be a professional fighter, full-time fighter. You don't have to go to A-class fights, but a couple of C-class fights, you're going to have a better understanding, which was my motivation to step into the ring. Aikido's, Aikido is it's a very, very interesting martial art because it does teach you principles. And, if you think about those principles, one of the principles of Aikido is something called irami, which means somebody attacks you, you enter on the inside. Now, in Muay Thai, somebody throws a right body kick at you. One of the techniques you can use is you can move in and move to the right and catch the kick to absorb the energy, grab the head, knee, all this kind of stuff.
Very Aikido like.
Yeah, it's the same principle. There's a circle element there. Similarly, in jiu-jitsu, which I tend to do more of now, there are principles in jiu-jitsu where you use somebody else's energy against them. So Aikido is a very, very, I think, academic study on life, and it's an academic study on principles of body mechanics. I personally think it's not as obvious though. It's a martial art.
How much of the philosophy, I guess I'm going to ask, of Japan did you get into, or was that very rarely mentioned? The idea of Bushido and Zen, obviously.
Yeah, Zen not so much. I mean, Bushido, the way of the warrior. I read Hagakure probably a couple of times when I was there, the way of the samurai. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're a Westerner rolling around Japan, rolling around Tokyo. You're going to the Hombudo. You kind of get into this kind of belief that you're some kind of modern day samurai. But the reality is, you're not. You're in Japan. You're in a kind of you're not in as safe an environment as you would be, say, training in a school here in this country on a part-time basis. There is a risk of serious injury on the Senshusei course. Mm-hmm. But you're not really it's not really Bushido. No. It's not life and death. It's not drawing your sword and you're going to decapitate the guy or he's going to decapitate you. It's not that.
Did you ever feel, when you were training with the other instructors who were teaching you, did you ever feel that they were getting out of control? Did you ever get that sense that you could have got
with me?
Yeah, deliberately trying to go out of the way to hurt you.
Yeah. There was one incident. I won't mention any names.
No.
But there was one incident. It is on a video on my YouTube channel somewhere, and we were doing this thing called Jiawaza. So Jiawaza is kind of it's as close to sparring as you can get. Yeah. Basically, I would attack you with a Shomanuchi strike over and over again, and you will respond to that, throw me, 10, 15 times, and then we change roles. And we were doing it was either Shomanuchi or Yokomanuchi side strike Jiawaza. I think it was side strike Jiawaza. So I come in, and the guy I'm with, he's taking my energy, spinning me around, he's throwing me nicely. I'm going with the flow, not too much, but not too little. And then suddenly I come in with a strike, and the guy chops me around the mouth here.
Oh, right. Okay.
I'm like, hang on a minute, mate. hang on a minute. And the instructor teaching the class watched. And my initial thought process was, okay, so I'm giving my energy and my body to you. You've just taken a liberty with me because you popped me on the jaw.
Yeah.
And my initial response, I didn't act on it, but my initial response in my head was, okay, if you want to play that game, then I'm more than happy to play that game because striking is my background. You've kind of, you've taken advantage. And that was, and the instructor shouted, Yame, stop, because it was about to.
He realized that something was going to.
Yeah. And I've seen, I've seen the guy that did that to me. I know why he did that to me. And he did that to me because Chino Sensei, when he took technique for Chino Sensei, he did it to him. So that side of Jiawaza and that side of Aikido, I don't like. And this is this shite relationship.
Yeah. Because it's pretty sacred, that relationship. You
trust.
Don't suddenly change your attack.
No.
Well, you don't even do that in a Muay Thai class. If you're working basics and you're practicing shin block and then you suddenly kick your partner in the head, it's just, you've been practicing low kicks. Yeah. And you see that happening in most martial arts, to be honest.
Yeah, it's
an ego thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's when it doesn't work. So there were a few situations like that. There was a few times where the instructor on the mat, you know, you start to ask yourself the question, you know, what if there was no rules? What if, you know, what if I brought my Muay Thai game and some jiu-jitsu game? And in fact, I talk about, I won't spoil it, but I talk about a couple of instances in the book, because there were a couple of times where we were invited to do a little bit of striking. And there were a couple of times where we were invited to do some ground game stuff.
Okay.
And do you want me to tell you one story?
Go on. I'll tell you what. Yeah. Well, actually, no. I'll tell you what. Right. We've done nearly, it's almost an hour.
Is it? Wow.
Almost 10 minutes shy of an hour. And that would be a really nice place to stop.
Okay.
And pick that thread up, because I can't believe how quickly the time's gone. But we've covered a huge area about your experiences, particularly within the Aikido. And this is a good time where we can break and move for part 3, where we can talk about a couple of these little stories. I think they're important, you know, your striking and the grappling and so on. But also talk about your experience of training Muay Thai as well at Fairtex in Tokyo, in Japan itself.
Sure, yeah.
Because cool. I know from back in the day, they tried to open a Thai boxing club. The Japanese tried to open a Thai boxing club, and the Thais were dead against it. They hated it. They thought it was disgusting, you know. I mean, I think that attitude's all changed now. Yeah. Because it was like the Japanese were denigrating the art. The Japanese should not be doing Muay Thai, you know. That was back in the early 70s. But this would be a good place to stop this particular part of the conversation and pick it up with those stories, unless you really want to tell the story.
No. I think next time, to talk a little bit about, and I trained at Fairtex in Tokyo. I also trained at a gym called the Ihara Gym, Shin Nihon Kickboxing, where one of the famous K1 fighters, Masato, trained. So I trained there first. So I've got a few stories about training Muay Thai over there, and also training jiu-jitsu, and maybe bringing the martial journey up to date, because now I train
I think that's a great idea, because I like leaving people on a little bit of a cliffhanger.
You do. That's good.
That's what you're supposed to do. Isn't that what you're supposed to do in these podcast things?
That's exactly what you're supposed to do. Yeah.
So, I've explained it all now. So the veil of the illusion has now gone, you know.
Yeah.
But it's been really good speaking to you, mate, as always. And I genuinely, I'll say this to everybody I listen to, I get as much out of these. I really do. It's really fascinating. It makes you think. And I will finish it there, Simon. I'd like to say thanks very much, mate. I look forward to part 3.
Thank you, boss. Thank you. Kopkun Kap. Us.
Kopkun Kap. Yeah, Kopkun Kap.
Us.